I wanted to talk about advantage muscle can give you in a self-defense situation and if bodybuilders can actually fight. And I've noticed that there are many videos on YouTube that will highlight fights between an untrained bodybuilder and then some form of martial arts practitioner. I've seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys and boxers and just your run-of-the-mill MMA guy taking on an untrained bodybuilder, and all these videos end with a bodybuilder getting beat up. The fighter in the video is usually a smaller guy or has a very average-looking physique, and the bodybuilder has very prominent muscles. So what are the purpose of these videos? Is it to humiliate bodybuilders? Is it to display that muscle size is useless in a fight? What is the real motivation behind it? I really think jealousy and insecurity motivates these videos, and I'll explain why. The videos really don't make much sense, and they prove very little, because you're taking an untrained person and then putting them against someone who trains in a martial art on a regular basis. It's really all about what you train for. If you took the same MMA fighter or martial artist who chokes the bodybuilder out, could that same fighter hang with him lifting weights at the gym or on the bodybuilding stage? Definitely not. This is the same thing really as when Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather in the boxing match a couple years back. Floyd is exclusively a boxer and Conor is an MMA fighter. And in the boxing match, Conor's arsenal was pretty much taken away. All he could do was boxing, punches. He couldn't do any kicks or any ground game, grappling. So he was fighting an entirely different fight. Floyd trained exclusively in boxing, so he's naturally going to have the advantage in a boxing match. And it's no surprise Mayweather won, even though Conor did have a puncher's chance, which is a fluke where someone lands a lucky shot, and that can happen in any fight. So the point is with this, is muscle in a fight useless? And I think this attempt to crap on bodybuilders, as I said, is really rooted in jealousy and insecurity by those who have inferior looking physiques. Because if that wasn't the case, why not make an example of power lifters who tend to carry more body fat, or very tall guys, or just very large guys who are untrained in fighting. I'm sure videos like that exist on YouTube, but the example that I see over again is, it's a very defined, chiseled, large muscled bodybuilder being used for these videos. And in my opinion, this doesn't mean strength and muscle is useless in a fight or in a self-defense situation. To me, all it really says is even with a strength advantage, an untrained person will lose to a trained fighter every time. It's really just common sense, which is why these videos are useless. And it's really just designed for people with inferior physiques to get their jollies by watching a guy with muscles get beat up. Ken Shamrock and Brock Lesnar are both examples of fighters who have impressive muscle mass, and they've both racked up plenty of wins in their careers. So to discount strength and muscle as useless is a bit silly. The difference being is Shamrock and Lesnar are trained fighters, and the bodybuilders in the videos have no fight training. Or if they have any fight training, it's very little. You can tell they are very much amateur when it comes to fighting technique. So muscle alone may not win you a fight against a trained fighter, but let's talk about like on the street, like the average Joe in a street confrontation or in a bar or somewhere else. What advantages would muscles have in this scenario? What advantage would large muscle mass or prominent muscle mass have? Simply put, muscle size translates to strength. You can't get big muscles without having some kind of strength. Therefore, having big muscles sends the message that you are strong. Size alone is a deterrent, whether it's height or width, because street predators will not pick out a strong-looking man as a victim to start trouble with. They always go for weaker-looking victims, nearly always, unless they're under the influence of some kind of drug or just psychotic. Most people are not going to mess with a strong-looking person if they're looking to start trouble or commit a crime. Picking on a man who has a clear strength advantage isn't wise because he already has strength as a clear attribute. Whether he's trained to fight or not is a big question mark in the mind of the would-be attacker. So if you have wide shoulders and bulging biceps, someone is likely going to pass you over rather than target you out to start trouble. Humans have a few ways to use intimidation through their body and can convey strength and discourage an attacker by their appearance alone. Walking upright with confidence and having muscles is definitely one way to do it. Many believe men with facial hair are more intimidating. It's almost like a lion with his mane. Although since hipsters have adopted beards now, it's hard to say whether this is actually a factor because you see a lot of weak-looking men with beards. If you consider a man that looks like a crazy berserker like Bruiser Brody, then I could definitely see it being a factor. A guy who's just naturally big, weight, bone structure, and well over 6 foot is less likely to be messed with as well. So sheer size is a factor in terms of intimidation. If you are under 6 foot, it is even more all the reason to increase your muscle size. You may not be able to increase your height, but you certainly can increase your width and muscle size, which will serve as a deterrent. The intimidation factor in history has been seen with the Greek hoplites also. They used horsehair crests on their helmets, which gave the illusion of increased height. War paint used by peoples like the Celts and American Indian tribes also gave a fierce appearance and psychological advantage. In an actual fight, muscle and strength shouldn't be discounted, especially in a confrontation between two people who happen to have no formal martial arts training. In this scenario, I will give the advantage to the lifter over the guy who abuses his body with drugs and fast food and doesn't train on a regular basis. The strength developed in the gym shouldn't be discounted, and it does give you an edge, especially against the untrained. I've seen a fighter with impressive biceps literally curl his arm out of an arm bar. In my own experience while practicing technique in MMA class, I had shot in and had a waist lock on my partner, who was considerably taller and larger than myself, but wasn't someone who did bodybuilding or lifted weights on a regular basis. The technique called for him to push off my back, swinging his hips out to break the waist lock, then hook my arm with a whizzer and drive me forward. After a few attempts, my opponent was unable to break the waist lock and the grip I had on him. I will credit my strength and grip training because I lift weights on a consistent basis. Finally, I had to voluntarily loosen the grip just so he could properly break the waist lock and actually practice the technique. Examples such as these goes to show that sheer strength should not be discredited, especially in a situation when the stronger person has a hold on a weaker person. Someone with very large muscle may also have slower punches than a smaller person who is quicker. An analogy may be the larger arm is like a musket ball leaving a black powder rifle, whereas the smaller opponent has a lighter round, like a bullet leaving a .22 caliber rifle. The bodybuilder with a more muscular arm shouldn't be discounted. The arm, while not as quick, it weighs more and still will inflict crushing damage if it does connect with the target. In a street confrontation, odds are low you're going to be dealing with an actual trained martial artist. In the past, there were criminal gangs in China that were trained in Kung Fu, but today in the US, you are not likely to have a run-in with someone trained in martial arts looking for trouble. If they have the money to afford proper training, odds are they aren't roaming around picking fights with random people on the street or in bars. So I still say someone who trains with weights has a strength advantage alone and is better off than someone who does no physical training. In conclusion, I will say any fight training puts you at a greater advantage over someone who doesn't train at all, no matter what their physical condition may be. Attributes like muscle size, strength, height are all secondary to proper martial arts training. If you are someone who trains exclusively with weights or just does bodybuilding, if that's your primary focus, I would suggest adding some fight training in a couple times a week, in addition to being more prepared for an altercation, as it is definitely better than cardio on a treadmill. Some street defense classes a couple nights a week are best because you can actually spar with a live opponent, which there's no better substitute. It's the closest thing you could get to an actual fight scenario. But if you can't do that, getting a bag and practicing punches and kicks is definitely better than nothing at all. And if you could find someone that you could even do open hand sparring with, that would be even better. But I understand, like, people have different situations and schedules and budgets, so it may not always work out that way where you can go to class. So at least practicing some strikes would be good. But overall, in conclusion, I'll say that muscles and strength do not put you at a disadvantage. It actually would give you an advantage over an untrained fighter. And the primary thing to remember is, yes, training will always beat an untrained opponent unless he happens to get lucky. But these videos that show bodybuilders getting beat up by trained fighters really proves nothing.